Welcome. My name is Sabine O'Neill, and I'm one of the SLDS trainers for the Georgia Department of Education. Today's session is dedicated to social data inside of SLDS. That means we'll be looking at attendance, enrollment, and transcript information regarding the students in your class. I sometimes refer to SLDS as your school's public records vault on steroids. You have a huge amount of data available at your fingertips, and it doesn't require you to be locked in an old, stuffy public records room in order to get a historical view of who these students are. Based on the information you have here, I hope you have already logged into your student information system. If you haven't, please do so now. If you do not have access to a student information system at this moment, you can open a browser and type in the following: GOO.gl/OF4C_T_V. Upon doing so, you'll be taken directly to a sample teacher's dashboard. If you happen to be logged into SLDS as an administrator, it will be easier to follow this session if you're actually logged into SLDS as a teacher. So scroll down to the bottom of the page, find your teacher dashboard icon, and choose a teacher from within that teacher dashboard. I also hope that you're familiar with SLDS. If not, I'd suggest you stop this recording and watch the SLDS overview recording before proceeding with this one. Also during this presentation, I will be asking you to try a few exercises. This is to allow you the hands-on experience. I do realize that some of this may be difficult for you to watch my screen and try to imitate what I'm doing, so I will be pausing periodically so that you can try the exercises. So let's begin looking at social data in SLDS. I'm going to now move my screen over to my SLDS teacher dashboard. And the first thing we want to talk about before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of this session is a couple of navigational rules within SLDS. As a reminder to all our users, please refrain from using the back button if you want to navigate throughout the platform. The SLDS information that you see is confidential information, and much like banking information, we don't want you to be using the back button to go to an area of data. We actually want you to be clicking on either a link, a tab, or rather a link, a tab, or you may use the small arrow that you see on the toolbar. Right now that arrow looks grayed out, but that's because I haven't drilled down into anywhere. If I use my SLDS platform and any one of my links to drill down into the data, then I will see that this little arrow turns blue. Once this arrow is blue, it is the option I can use to go back to a previous page. Okay, so now that we've reviewed some standard navigation rules, let's now talk about some of the social data in SLDS. The first thing worth talking about is attendance. So you all know that SLDS tracks historical data, and therefore you will notice that the attendance tracker is actually displaying last year's attendance. So you've got your students in your class this year, but you're looking at last year's attendance. The reason for this is to allow you as a teacher to identify those students that you teach this year who may have had attendance issues last year. You know, many of your students do experience chronic absenteeism. So SLDS will help you determine whether the students who missed a lot of school last year are showing a pattern or not. You may also use that information to determine whether absenteeism for the student has correlated in poor achievements or poor grades. So here's a question for you. Did you know that your school's CCRPI is affected by student absenteeism? It used to be we were allowed to have a student gone for 15 days. And on the 16th day is actually when the CCRPI would get affected. However, the allowable days now of absenteeism is down to 5 days. either excused or unexcused. And that's for the whole year. So actually CCRPI now gets affected on the 6th day that the student was absent. You'll notice that on my demo database, the number of students that I currently teach who were absent for more than 6 days last year is 42%. How do I get to that 42%? Well, since my criteria is knowing what percentage of my class missed more than 6 days last year, I do need to look and add the students who were absent more than 6 to 10 days, or between 6 to 10 days, that's my 17%. And then I need to add to that the students who are absent more than 10 days last year, and that's that 25%. So when I add both of those together, I can see that my students were absent for 42% of my students were absent for more than 6 days last year. So here's a small exercise that you can do in your own SLDS database. By looking at your attendance tracker on your teacher dashboard, you can also determine the total number of, or the total percentage of students who missed more than 6 days last year. Remember that you're adding both the percentage of the students who had 6 to 10 days absent, along with the students who missed more than 10 days. So at this point in time, I'm going to pause this recording at this time, just for a few minutes, so you can look at the percentage of students absent last year from your own database. I'll remind you when it's time to come back to the webinar so that we can continue this session. It's now time to come back to the webinar session so we can continue with our review of SLDS social data. The next thing I want to talk about is actually looking at an attendance report inside of SLDS and using it to find out exactly how many days were missed by your students last year. Now remember, this is the students you teach this year, but what their attendance record was from last year. Now to do this, you will want to drill down, in this particular case, on the students who missed more than 10 days last year. That's the red data point that you see located in the attendance tracker chart. SLDS does give you comparison data so that you can look at your classroom and compare it to how your students have done in comparison to the school, to the district, and to the state. However, FERPA only permits you to have access and drill down access to your own classroom data. If you're lucky enough not to have any students marked as missing 10 days or more, then you can use any one of the other categories. Remember that the green represents 0 absences, in which I do not have any at this point in time in my database. The yellow is a representation of 1 to 5 absences. 6 to 10 absences is in orange, and then the red is, of course, the students who missed more than 10. You'll also note that as I hover my mouse on top of these data points, I am being given more specific information about what's behind this particular data point. So even if I want to hover at the state level information or the district level information, I can at least get some information as to what I'm comparing it with. So if I hover over the 20% of the state students who missed more than 10 absences last year, I can see that that number is represented by close to 2 million students. All right, so let's go ahead and drill down and take a look at a report. So upon drilling into that data point, I have now produced a report that identifies students who missed more than 10 absences last year. All right, and once I'm in this report, there are a number of things that I can do with this report. The first thing I can see is that I have the ability throughout this report to sort the data. I can choose the sorting in whatever fashion I want by using the column headers that I've got on this report and using the little black arrow that's noted beside each of the column headers. In this particular case, I simply want to sort the data so that I can see the student who missed the most days last year and have that student at the top of my report. So upon clicking on the little black arrow beside the days absent column header, the initial sort will change the data so that it's the student with the least amount of absences at the top of my report. And if I click one more time on that sort option, it will change the sort so that I now have a student who missed the most days at the top of my report. And in this case, you can see that 17 days was the most missed by my student last year. Along with that sorting feature, I have obviously the availability of seeing different other pieces of information. Generally speaking, I should have or will have the latest achievement information available to me on this student. Now there may be times when you don't see any achievement information simply because this is generally listing the achievements for the last 2 years for this particular student. If you don't have any achievement information available to you on this page, but would like to see if there is some achievement information available for these particular students within this single report, you can scroll on up to the very top of this report and see that under the school years, right now I'm selected only to see any achievements based on the 17 or the 16 school year. If I simply want to change this so that I can see every and all pieces of achievement or that longitudinal achievement, I can simply choose another year, or I can use the Select All feature. Upon doing that, I do absolutely have to hit the View Report option available to me on the right-hand side of the page. If I don't hit the View Report, then nothing will happen. However, upon hitting View Report, this should relaunch the page, refresh it, so that I can see any and all achievements that these particular students have had over the course of their history here in the Georgia Public School System. So that's the way for me to see more achievement information if I want. Okay, the other things is we not only produce achievement information and days absent, but there's some other demographic information available for you to see here. I've got a column dedicated to SWD. Those are my students with disabilities. I also have a column dedicated to retained. Now this retained column, it's important for you to know that there may be times when you will see a Y listed on that column. So for instance, in this particular student, Willie Zach, I do have a Y indicating that he was retained. But the Y in here simply is an identifier to me that this particular student met the criteria that the district has for retention. It doesn't guarantee that that student actually was retained. I have a column related to gifted, a column related to ED. Now in SLDS, when you see a column related to ED, the ED stands for economically disadvantaged. ELL are your English language learners. You have a column for race and ethnicity, grade level, and student name. So far, we've learned we can sort through any one of these columns, and we also see that there's a lot of other information available to me on this report. The other thing I'd like to point out for you is the ability for you to be able to print or export this report. Any type of exporting is best done through the export icon that you see at the top of our SLDS toolbar. In this particular case, it is represented by a floppy disk. If you simply click on the little black arrow beside that floppy disk, you will produce a menu of ways that you can export this data. Most commonly done, or export options, are as a CSV file, an Adobe file, an Excel file, and a Word file. Ultimately, which export option you plan to use will depend on how you want to use this information. Now it's time for you to find a student who had the most absences in your database. I will pause the recording here so you can transition over to your SLDS teacher dashboard. Remember, if you have it, click on the red data point that represents the classroom students who had more than 10 absences last year. Make sure to use the sort option to easily identify the student with the most days absent last year. I will remind you when it's time to come back to the webinar so that we can continue this session. Okay, it's time to come back to the webinar so we can continue with our review of social data. Now that we've actually created a report listing the students with more than 10 absences, we can use that report to look at an individual student's longitudinal data. You do this by launching the student's individual profile report. That profile report will permit you to see that student's attendance history along with lots of other things. You can simply click on that student's name on this report to initiate the launching of the student profile. However, I do want to remind you that at the bottom of every single one of our SLDS data pages, there's also a search option. You can use the search option to either find a student by GTID, if you happen to know that number. You enter the number here and you hit search. Otherwise, you can do a more traditional search via a student name. You'll note here that we provide for you in this search window the default school year, the district, and the school you teach at. If you teach multiple grades, you'll be asked to select which grade from the grade drop. Otherwise, it will default to the actual grade you do teach. And beside that, if you click on the drop, you'll be provided with a roster of students. You simply need to choose the appropriate student's name off this roster and make sure you do hit the go button. That is the way for you to actually launch and initiate the launching of the profile report. So there's a huge amount of data available for you to see about this student. In today's session, we won't have time to review all the various pieces of that data. However, if you are not familiar with the student profile and the data that's contained therein, you should make sure to attend one of our live in-school training sessions, wherein we will review the profile in more detail. If you're not able to attend one of our live in-school sessions, then make sure to spend some time reviewing our other SLDS webinars so you can get a greater understanding of what's in the student profile report. So as we look at this profile report, you'll see that it actually contains the historical attendance for this student. As of this year, our 2016-2017 school year, the attendance may go back as far as 10 years. Please note that data may not always be available on your students. So if your student was not schooled in a Georgia public school system, in other words, they were perhaps homeschooled, they were in a private school, or they were schooled out of state, in those instances, you may actually see little data or you may see gaps in the data. Also note that the year that you see marked at the bottom of each column represents the full fiscal year. So in my database, I know that my student was absent last year for 39 days for the year 2016, which is actually the school year of 2015 and 2016 together. So that is a representation of the full fiscal year. So now it's time to look at your individual student's historical attendance information. Again, I will pause the recording here so you can transition over to your SLDS teacher dashboard. Remember to click on the name of a student in the report that you launched earlier in order to initiate the profile report. I'll also remind you that if you simply want to choose a particular student from within your class roster, you can use the search option located down on the bottom of your SLDS data page. I'll remind you when it's time to come back to the webinar so that we can continue this session. All right, it's now time to come back to the webinar session so that we can continue with our review of the social data inside of SLDS. Next area to review after we've looked at attendance is the student's enrollment history. Not surprisingly, the enrollment history can also reveal to you a lot of information about your student. I'd like to generally see a boring history, so then I can assume perhaps that this student has led a pretty stable school life, attending probably the same school throughout elementary, middle, and maybe even high school. But often, unfortunately, you will find that the enrollment history is not boring. And that can lead you into some insight into this particular student that you might not have known otherwise. So enrollment history is located about 3/4 of the way down the profile report. Notice that we give you as much data related to the student enrollment as possible, including but not necessarily limited to what you're seeing here. You will generally have the grade, the date of entry, the date of withdrawal, schools attended, reasons for transfers, whether a student has been marked as needing to repeat a grade, if the student has a qualifying disability, is receiving services, has been identified as gifted. Those are generally things that you will find in this enrollment report. Now, it's important to look carefully at what this report or this table is showing you. At a quick glance, I could easily think that this student has repeated kindergarten at least 6 or 7 times. But on further investigation, I can actually see that although this student has repeated several times, there has also been quite a bit of transfer by the student. So I can see the day they entered into the school and the date they transferred out and what school they went to. And of course, that information will be available to you if it is another school within the Georgia public school system anywhere in the state. All right, so a little bit below your enrollment history is what we refer to as the unofficial or the not official transcript. This is an opportunity for you as a teacher to go back and look at your students' previous grades in all the subject matters that they've taken. If you are dealing with high school students, you may actually also have some information here relatable to the credit value that the student has obtained when he or she completed that course. So between attendance, enrollment, and your unofficial transcript, you've got a lot of data here that will help you identify what's been going on with that student's life within their school life. Remember that these grades here are considered unofficial as they do come from the teacher's grade books and are uploaded with the standard SLDS data upload on an annual basis. Now it's time for you to go back and look at one of your individual students' historical enrollment and transcript information. Again, I'll pause the recording so you can transition over to your SLDS teacher dashboard. Remember, you'll want to scroll down about 3/4 of the way down the profile report to find the enrollment information. And then just below that, you'll find the unofficial transcript data. I will again remind you when it's time to come back to the webinar so we can continue this session. So you may also be wondering, what else can you do with this information? As you see, we've got lots of data relevant to your student for you to have access to. But some of this information may also be helpful for you as a teacher when you're trying to meet some of your TEKS objectives. So let me show you how that might be possible. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, you can use the export option to export reports out of SLDS. Well, your student profile is a report that is also exportable. A profile, if exported to Word, for instance, could be very useful when having a meeting about the student. It could be that that meeting is with a parent, the student themselves, or you could perhaps be involved in an RTI, an IEP meeting, etc. During that meeting, you can use the exported Word profile to track notes or goals, create signature and date lines, etc. And this can be a tool, and a powerful one, when used to show your administrative staff how you're using the data inside of SLDS to meet some of your TEKS objectives. So let me show you how I might propose that you do that. I'm going to go ahead and export this profile out to Word. Now, depending on which browser you use, it'll generally allow for you to open up that document. In this particular case, I am exporting out of Internet Explorer to Word. I enable my editing, and at that point in time, a full copy of the data that I had in the SLDS platform has now been transferred over into a fully editable Word document. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, you can use this now to track goals that you might have on the student. Perhaps you're just taking notes that are part of a meeting that you're having on the student. And as I indicated as well, if you want to turn this into a little mini contract, it might make perfect sense for you to add a parent signature and or a date line here as well. If you need to, you can just send this to the printer and have this information available for a parent to sign off on. Now, I did also mention that this information may be helpful in your meeting some of your TEKS objectives. So let me explain to you how I might suggest you do that. So you now have taken this profile and you've gathered some information on it. And because it's an electronic document, you do have the opportunity, if you want, to upload this profile to your TEKS file. And if you do that, this may be an opportunity for you to meet some of the objectives that you have, such as communication, professionalism, use of data, so on and so forth. You'll never meet all 10 of your objectives, but it could potentially meet up to 6 of the objectives that you have. The only thing that I recommend is that if you are going to make a student profile and upload into your TEKS file, then please make sure you get rid of or you remove all identifying information, confidential information about the student. Because as you know, we don't normally want any of this information to be easily identifiable by anybody else who's looking at this data. So again, just remove any identifiable information for this particular student, such as their name and their GTID, throughout the document before you make this as an upload. Once you're done doing whatever it is you need to do with this document, you can certainly save it if you want. Otherwise, in this particular case, I'm not going to save this document. When I close out of that document, I'm just placed right back into my SLDS platform. And now I can do whatever I would like to do next. Perhaps I want to view another student's record, or perhaps I simply want to go to another location within my SLDS platform. Remember too that if you are done at this point in time looking at this data and you want to sign out of SLDS, we do recommend that you use the logout option rather than the red X or the X located at the top of your browser. The logout option will properly close out the data that you've been reviewing. So that concludes the information I had to share with you on SLDS social data. To receive your certificate of attendance, you are going to please go to the following website, GOO.gl/I, capital D, lowercase c, the number 2, capital J, capital Q. Remember, this is a link which is case sensitive, so you'll want to make sure you properly type that into your URL. Remember that this is your ticket out the door, so when entering your information, please make sure to enter carefully the correct email address, because we will be using that contact information on this ticket out the door to send you your to send you your certificate of attendance. If you should have any questions or any issues with that, please feel free to contact me, Sabine O'Neill, at the email address that you see listed down here. Otherwise, if you are looking for on-site training or additional information about SLDS, feel free to contact or reach out to any one of our training team members. And that can be done by emailing slds@doe.k12.ga.us. That concludes my session on social data within SLDS. I hope you found the information informative. Thank you.